doing other things, it sounds like, and has worked as an executive director, curator, historian, and archivist. And I'll let her talk about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Very sweet. So I should tell you guys that I have 4 students here, and they are turning in their master's capstone 2 weeks from today, and I am going to be grading it. Okay? So that should explain any kind of unwarranted enthusiasm that they express. 90 miles from us in Stockton, on Pershing Avenue, in Victory Park, in a neighborhood of bungalows that was built just after the end of the First World War, sits the Hag Museum. City Fathers started the museum in the boom days of the 1920s, when Stockton was at the center of California's agricultural economy, and ships loaded with produce from the Central Valley made their way down the San Joaquin Delta to the mouth of the Golden Gate. It was to be a history museum, a museum that told the story of San Joaquin County and its county seat, Stockton. But cash ran short, and the museum committee found itself negotiating with native son turned New Yorker, Bob McKee. McKee had married Isla Haggett. There they are. Note the parasol. Note the parasol and the monocle. Isla had inherited not only her family's mining fortune, but also her parents' and grandparents' collection of very large 19th century French and American paintings. McKee had an idea for the San Joaquin County History Museum. He and Isla would send them enough money to build the museum and paintings to fill it if they would name the museum after Isla's family. The Hag Museum opened in 1931. Generations of school children have visited on field trips and learned about art and history by looking at collections. It's one of Stockton's biggest cultural attractions, hosting a robust program of traveling exhibitions and special events. The Hag contains the largest collection of art in the Central Valley, with paintings by American artists such as Albert Bierstadt. They're on the top. There are actually 3 paintings of Yosemite Valley, each a little bit more giant than the one before, hanging at the Hag. And paintings by French artists, French salon artists, French academic artists like William Bouguereau. That painting is actually almost as big as Yosemite Valley. It's a lot of nymph. It's a lot of nymph. In the collection, there's also a painting that may or may not be by Paul Gauguin. Flowers and Fruit, or to call it by its museum accession number 1939-34-3, hung in the European gallery for decades with a label attributing it to Gauguin until almost exactly 1 year ago. In early 2016, the Hag hired me to research its art collection as the staff prepared to reinterpret and reinstall it. On my first visit to the museum, I saw Flowers and Fruit, and I thought it was a fairly traditional still life. A few misshapen apples, mismatched faces, roses, pinkish yellow cloth. In this light, it's a funny color. Either some fancy wallpaper or maybe a screen. It didn't look like famous paintings by Gauguin that I had seen before. When I began working in the collection's archives, I learned there had been questions before about the authenticity of Flowers and Fruit. The painting had been studied under ultraviolet light, experts had been consulted, and the painting had remained in the gallery with the results filed away. The staff and I agreed that I would look into it. If we could settle the question of who painted Flowers and Fruit, then we could tell a more complete story and add to the body of knowledge about the painting and its creator. We could entice more visitors to the museum, generate scholarly and museum interest, bolster Stockton's hometown pride, and perhaps attract more revenue. If, on the other hand, research demonstrated that the painting was unequivocally not a Gauguin. If it was a fake, a canvas created and signed by a forger, then the museum faced potential bad publicity, loss of public trust, loss of prestige, and a loss of revenue. Attributions of works of art change every day. When they change because of new research, of new information that comes to light, or that a researcher interprets in a new way. This research can take many forms. Special photography, connoisseurship, and historical investigation are some. Studying a painting under ultraviolet light shows the layers of paint on the canvas. This is one way of looking at it in a scientific way. If one layer of paint was applied at a different time, after previous layers of paint had dried, or using a different kind of paint, then it will show differently under ultraviolet light. When museum staff looked at 1939-34-3 under this ultraviolet light, the inscription appeared to have been applied when the rest of the paint was still wet on the canvas. So here's the inscription. Okay? It's hard, I don't know, can you make it out? Can you make it out in this light? You don't, yeah, just for a second. I don't want them to go to sleep. Okay, so it says "Un ami roi, PG." It means to the friend roi, R-O-Y. Okay. So it had been applied at the same time as the rest of the paint. So whoever painted it signed it at the same time. It wasn't, nobody went back and changed anything. Connoisseurship, a second way of figuring out where a painting comes from, embraces historical knowledge, embraces historical context, but it also adds another piece. The connoisseur develops his or her expert opinion by using the tool of close visual study, close looking at an artist's distinctive style. Historical research is what it sounds like it is, recreating the chronological journey of a work of art. For a painting like Flowers and Fruit, this journey moves backwards in time from its present location to the moment it left the easel. So before I came to the project, the museum had used two strategies to research 1939-34-3. Those strategies yielded different results. One, the ultraviolet light study, which suggested that the painting could be a Gauguin, or at least was signed at the same time that it was painted. And one, an expert review by a connoisseur that argued with confidence that it wasn't. I brought the skills of historical research to the project. And in the next few minutes, I'll tell you about my work, and then at the end, you can see what you think. I'll tell you what we're doing next. So here's what I learned. I began in the Hag's collection archives. And there I found the receipt for the purchase of Flowers and Fruit. December 31st, New Year's Eve, 1929, not a bad way to celebrate. Go buy some paintings. East 79th Street is where Mrs. Robert T. McKee, Isla Hagen McKee lived. And she goes to Clapp and Graham and buys these two paintings. Clapp and Graham were prominent dealers in art and antiques. They worked with American art collectors like Rockefeller and DuPont. On that cold day at the end of December, Isla purchased a flower painting from the up-and-coming immigrant Maurice Stern, who was shortly going to have a retrospective at MoMA, which was still brand new, right? And then this painting by the French post-impressionist Paul Gauguin, who was having a moment at the time. In 1939, Bob McKee, now a widower, packed these two paintings up and sent them to join the rest of the Hagen collection in Stockton, where the Gauguin was accessioned as 1939-34-3. So far, so good. I knew how the painting had gotten there. I knew that Clapp and Graham were reputable art dealers whose archives from the 1920s, alas, no longer exist. The Hagen had exhibited our painting since 1939, but did not appear ever to have loaned it for exhibition at another museum nor had any museum staff published research on it. For the purposes of the art world, in which specialists communicate by publishing their research and trading works for exhibition, flowers and fruit had disappeared. But the painting did appear in the 1964 Catalogue Raisonné for Gauguin's works. Now, created by scholars and researchers, Catalogue Raisonné depict an artist's body of work and generally contain, for each work of art, everything that we know about it. They take decades to put together, as you would imagine. Once they're published, they become the recognized source, the authoritative source for works created by the particular artist. To learn the provenance, the history of ownership of a painting attributed to an artist, the first place you start is with the catalog. The 1964 Gauguin Catalogue Raisonné was the product of 25 years of research. It contained 638 entries for paintings. Its principal authors were the Parisian art dealers and researcher Georges and his son Daniel Wildenstein. And I always wonder when I see photographs like this of people like the Wildensteins, if we think that people who write Catalogue Raisonné look like this because we've seen the photographs of them looking like this, or do they look like this because they are the ones, it's kind of a chicken and egg situation, I think, you know? Which came first, them looking like that, or us believing that they all look like that? Anyway, it's a pretty great picture with his little magnifying glass. He is a connoisseur. Georges and Daniel Wildenstein were both Gauguin experts, and here is what they had to say about the painting they called Flowers and Fruit. It was painted in 1889, and it went first, its first owner was the painter, Louis Roy, the painter Roy. We'll call him owner number one. From Roy, the painting went to the Barbizonge Gallery around 1920. In 1923, it was sold to the impresario and actor Sacha Guitry. Sacha Guitry sold it in 1929 to an art dealer called Max Kaganovich. Max Kaganovich sold it at some point to the Reinhardt Galleries in New York. The Wildensteins knew that the Reinhardt Galleries had gone out of business in 1957, so their best guess was that it had passed at some point in those 20 years, 30 years. And then it disappeared. So what did I learn from this entry? First of all, I learned that somebody before 1929 had photographed this painting. Right? If the Wildensteins didn't know where the painting was in 1964 when they published their catalog, they couldn't have taken a photograph of it and published it. Therefore, they must have reprinted a photograph that had existed before 1929. So the painting existed before 1929. Second, it told me that the Wildensteins had never heard of the Hag Museum in Stockton, California. It is a long way from the right bank of Paris to the California Delta. And since there was not a published catalog of the museum's paintings collection, there was no way for the Wildensteins to trace the work after Isla purchased it. My next step was to recheck the provenance that the catalog listed. So I'll come back, I'll show you this slide again. I realize that these are names that are household words for me. I realize that they may be new to some of you, but we have perhaps Gauguin, the painter, the creator of the artwork, Louis Roy, Barbizonge Gallery, Sacha Guitry, Max Kaganovich, Reinhardt Galleries, Clapp and Graham, Isla Hag and the Hag Museum. The Wildensteins stop here, and we start here. Time in the archives of the New York Times yielded this advertisement from the Reinhardt Galleries. The last known owners of the painting from the Wildensteins had an exhibition in New York in 1929, in the fall of 1929, a couple months before Isla bought this painting. And who had they shown in this exhibition? All the big guys from the time: Picasso, Matisse, Musso, Braque, and Gauguin. Could find nothing more about this exhibition, and I couldn't find anything out about the relationship between Reinhardt Galleries and Clapping Ram, except that they're 3 blocks away from each other.
Stephanie and Button.
Okay. So I went to the next entry, Max Kaganovich. Some digging revealed that Kaganovich, whose personal papers are now in the archives of the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, had immigrated to Paris in 1924 and supported himself by selling art. He later opened a gallery that became a hub for modern artists, among them Picasso, Matisse, Dufy, and Braque. Okay, I thought. So Kaganovich could have sold the painting to Reinhardt Galleries sometime in the summer of 1929. How did Kaganovich get it? Well, Sacha Guitry, owner number 3, was one of the biggest celebrities in France in the 1920s and an old friend of Picasso, Kaganovich's client. It did not seem unreasonable that he could have dabbled, Guitry, could have dabbled in collecting art. It seemed feasible that he could have purchased the painting from the Barbizonge Gallery, owner number 2, in 1923. That gallery, I learned, was known for its work with avant-garde artists such as Picasso, Modigliani, Braque, and in October 1919, come back. In October 1919, they had an exhibition of never-before-seen works by Gauguin. This exhibition was a big deal. It was reviewed and noticed throughout the French art world. And it was big enough that the gallery published an illustrated catalog. That illustrated catalog doesn't exist in any North American libraries. The only known copies are held with the rest of the Barbizonge Gallery documentation in the archives of the Musée d'Orsay. It is my best guess for the source of the Wildenstein's illustration. But what about before 1919? My next step was to find out who the first owner in the Wildenstein provenance, the painter Poix, was. If you find yourself with an internet connection and time to kill, I suggest you Google Louis Poix. You will get results that will be similar in number to the results that you'd get if you Googled Stephanie Brown. Roi, R-O-Y, is an alternate spelling of the French word for king, R-O-I. And as for Louis, France had 18 kings by that name, all of whom come up when you search them on Google. A ridiculous amount of patience brought me to Louis-Georges Éléonore Roy, an artist and high school art teacher who had exhibited his paintings with Gauguin at an exhibition in 1889 and had known him off and on throughout the early 1890s. Gauguin regularly exchanged paintings with friends or gave his friends paintings to pay off debts. Here is Gauguin's notebook from the late 1880s. And you can see that he has exchanged a still life with Degas. He's exchanged a painting of snow with Miss Cassatt. And then he has given paintings to these other 2 painters whose names we don't know, whose names are not familiar. Perhaps then, Gauguin, who was famous for being perennially broke, had inscribed this still life to Poix and given it to him in payment for some loan from the more solvent schoolmaster. Poix died in Paris in 1907. The 12 years between his death and the Barbizonge exhibition remain a mystery. The results of this historical investigation into the provenance of 1939-34-3 seem to suggest that this painting could be an authentic Gauguin. It had passed through the hands of legitimate dealers and collectors. The connection between its original owner and the subject of the painting's inscription was solid. But what about the expert assessment? 2 Gauguin experts, one dead and one very much alive, but anonymous for tonight, have also examined 1939-34-3. In another set of records at the Hagen, I found the correspondence between the museum and Dr. Wojciech Girard-Wasiutyński. Girard-Wasiutyński was a Princeton-trained Gauguin scholar. He looked at a color slide that the museum sent him and concluded, to be perfectly honest, as you already know, it is very difficult to see the painting as part of Gauguin's oeuvre. He went on to analyze the painting in the language of connoisseurship. For example, the expert noted, the contrast between the way the fruit and the roses had been painted seems more like the willed application of a newly learned look by a follower, not searching for but imposing a style. The letter continues with more analysis of the painting, considering the drawing, the composition, the style of the signature. Girard-Wasiutyński goes on for 2 pages before writing, "It is not by Gauguin, but who is it by?" Still, the painting remained in the gallery. I have 1 page.
Yeah.
The museum had the sale receipt after all, and the painting had been listed, albeit as lost, in the 1964 Wildenstein catalog. Perhaps the certain shame of removing the painting from view was greater than the hypothetical shame of a visitor questioning the attribution. The business of changing attributions can mean editing decades worth of collections files, retraining tour guides, rewriting museum brochures, and changing souvenirs in the gift shop. It may seem like a drop in the ocean, but it is a drop with ripples. Last year, as the museum prepared to reinstall its permanent art collection, staff decided to revisit the question of 1939-34-3's authenticity. Through back channels, I was able to send a photograph of the painting to an expert who is currently at work on the updated edition of the catalog raisonné. After a few weeks, we heard back. "Absolutely not," said the expert. "This painting is not a Gauguin." He gave no reasons. And so we come to the end of our case. My historical investigation suggests no reason to assume that 1939-34-3 is anything other than an early painting by Gauguin. Why, after all, would Hua have bothered to fake the work of an artist who was barely scraping by? And if he had, why wouldn't he have sold the work immediately? 2 connoisseurs say otherwise. Their visual knowledge of Gauguin's style, their carefully honed aesthetic sensibilities say the painting is a fraud, a forgery created by Hua or someone else and passed off through the 1920s as a money-making commodity. Last month, the Hagen reopened its newly refurbished, reinterpreted, and reinstalled permanent art collection. Bierstadt and Bouguereau, William Merritt Chase, and Rosa Bonheur are there. But 1939-34-3 is in storage, awaiting the results of further research. My flight to Paris departs on January the 5th, and when the archives at the Musée d'Orsay open on the next Monday, I will be there.
It seems to me that if properly presented and publicized, having a fake could be a big attraction. It wouldn't necessarily be a disgrace.
There are shows, there have been exhibits that have traveled, putting fakes next to authentic paintings.
Make an educational opportunity out of it.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible, yes.
Is there any way to date the painting through analysis of the oils, the paint, or the canvas, or physical evidence like
Yeah,
that?
you can, that is possible.
Has that been done?
No. It hasn't. The problem is that there's never been enough of a reason to go through it. You know, in order for it to be dated like that, it would need to go out to a special studio. There would need to be somebody come in. I mean, I can't do that. I don't know anything about that. It certainly looks like, I mean, it hasn't been, it started before 1929. You could date it to some extent, but the dates, you may be thinking about the Nudler case. Maybe you've seen something about the Pollock forgeries that made a huge deal in New York 5-6 years ago now. In that case, what happened was somebody was forging Jackson Pollocks, which, you know, I mean, you gotta have a really good eye to know if a splatter paint is a fake, right? True connoisseur. So what they were able to do was determine that the paint that was on those canvases did not exist before Pollock died. It was a different chemical compound. Now, I don't think that you could do that with this painting because I think that the technology hasn't started to move faster later. But that's just my guess. Yes?
Yeah, one more question.
So, brushstrokes, isn't there sort of, each artist has a characteristic brushstroke
Yeah.
that you could sort of analyze?
Yeah. The thing is, at this point, his style is developing. And in fact, in 1888-89, he writes about how he is consciously trying to change his style. And so that, you know, 5 years later when he's in Tahiti painting naked ladies, you know, he's kind of, that's where we are, that's what we got, you know. But this is that kind of moment, it's a kind of threshold moment, which would make it a great time to fake, right? Except nobody cared about Gauguin until after he died in 1903. So why